pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So good evening. Welcome to the Thursday, February 12th meeting of the Westport Select Board. This meeting is being recorded. We also have remote participation. John Willard was going to be late, so he asked me to chair the meeting today. The first item we have is approval of the December 4, 2025 minutes. Has anybody had a chance to review them?
Yes.
Yes.
Do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve as written.
Second.
Any discussion?
I wasn't listed in the attendance, but I was there.
Okay.
Okay, we'll amend that.
Motion to approve as amended.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Is there any opposed? No. Okay, so that's the minutes. So the next item we have is a review of the Climate Resilience Report draft, chapters 1 to 4, and the health chapter. And I am turning it over to you.
Okay. I think the purpose here is just to update everybody on where we are. On January 27th, well, since our last meeting, I think we've made, I like to think we've made some progress. Dia and I have been working together. I've been feeding her a lot of the information according to the outline that we had established. So there's drafts of 4 chapters, which are kind of the introductory material. There's a placeholder for a chapter from UMass Dartmouth that's pending on the climate projections and those things. And then, according to the outline, would you mind bringing that up? I think it's slide 5 or 6.
Sure. Is everyone able to see my screen, or?
We're seeing
not yet.
a very small spot.
Okay. Let me try something else. Give me 1 second. How about now?
That's better. So you're not in presentation
Okay,
mode,
great.
but we can see it.
Good, good.
Maybe slide 8.
Slide 8? Okay.
Try that. No, keep going. Sorry.
Down?
Yes. 12. Okay, so this is our outline. So we've got an introduction. What is this report about? The second chapter is what's at stake, and that's where we kind of give an overview of the resource categories that we're going to be looking at, the asset categories, the people, the water, the agriculture, forestry, historic cultural resources, and human health that may be affected by climate changes and that we all want to protect. See, chapter 4 would be the projections for UMass Dartmouth, and then we would get into assessing the risks. And those right now are going category by category: human health, water, etc. We sent out a sample chapter for human health, which probably still needs some streamlining. I'd like to cut some material from there. I think some of what's in there will be already present in the UMass chapter. So Dia was able to send that out to all members, I think, on January 27th, about 2 weeks ago. And asked for written comments. We've received some. John gave us a full set of comments. We've heard bits and pieces, but through email from other people. So I want to make sure that everybody knows that we really want to move forward with this. So if you have comments on what you've seen so far, it's important that we get them soon. I know that there was some discussion among members about the structure of how we're presenting information. And I just wanted to go over some of the logic there. So we set up these subcommittees by asset category, resource category, health, agriculture, water, infrastructure. And those committees went ahead and evaluated the risks and reported on them. So we've continued to use that orientation in the report. We're going to be focusing on these categories. The other way to do it is to look at the threats and present the information according to the threats. So the big threats we've identified, everybody's identified, would be, you know, major storms, changes in heat, extreme heat, sea level rise, fire. There's 8 or 9 of them. So we could orient the presentation of the material according to the threats, but from my perspective, what we're trying to do here is talk about what's great about Westport. What is Westport? What are the things that we value here? And try and make a connection with the reader, and then talk about how those things are threatened. I think there's an opportunity to come back and focus on the, you know, things at the level of the threat. First of all, that's how UMass Dartmouth is going to present their information. So that there will be a concise summary of what the threats are in there. We just haven't seen it yet. And Dee, if you want to go maybe one more slide. Again. Yeah, so the other way we could do this is when we roll up the risk assessment results, we do something like this, where we've got the threats, you know, down the side, and then the affected areas across the top, and we have some sort of summary. I don't know if it's a color coding or a numerical score, what it's going to be. But that allows us to read across the threats and say, okay, this thing's red for a couple of areas, yellow for a couple of areas, so it probably is, you know, one of our more significant threats. Again, just colors and numbers thrown in there for illustration. So is that something we want to discuss further? Or do you want to wait and see how this looks before we decide to kind of restructure things?
Sounds like we're waiting on UMass for a piece, Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, they had assigned this with direction from professors there to some graduate students, and I had asked for an update, and she was just waiting to see how much editing and additional input that would require from the professors before they would have something ready to send to us. And I just don't have a timeline on that yet,
Yeah.
but I'll keep up on that.
I actually like the order as you kind of outlined it here. I'm not really familiar with a lot of these types of reports, but I like the way that it's written down.
Thanks. We've reviewed a number of these types of reports from different municipalities, and I would say most of them, maybe more than half, took the approach that we're taking. And that read as kind of a community-focused report, whereas when it was oriented according to the threats, it seemed like a more scientific report. So I think that's what we would be weighing is what kind of deliverable do we want to put out there? Something that focuses as more of a community focus or more of a scientific focus. I think the scientific stuff will all be there. It may just be that you're reading about these asset categories first.
Yeah, a couple of us had a discussion about this earlier in the week, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I just kind of feel strongly that we identify the threats. You've done it here, you want to sort of overlay it with each impact within the report, but I think it's important that we put forward what we think is a realistic assessment of each threat. I guess it's like sea level rise is the first one there, and its effect is quoted water, but I think maybe we need to expand that out. What is the threat? What is it a threat to? But also, what is a realistic assessment of where sea level rise is going to be for? I mean, we know the first assessment that we're working with today says that in 4 years we should have experienced 1.33 feet.
Yeah.
We're going to experience 1.33 inches. So we can, you know, put that in perspective. It's a real thing, but it's a long-term thing. But no, I appreciate it. Well, you put a lot of work into trying to get this arranged, and my only input is I'd like, coming from the science end of it, I'd like to see the science more explained in more detail and more realistic way. We have to remember we live in a purple community, and we want to bring people along with this report. We don't want to make it too easy for people to dismiss it. That's all.
And maybe it's, you know, we'll lean on that in the introduction. Maybe, you know, if you want to take a stab at something, or we can
Yeah.
work something up together, that can be part of, you know, the main introduction as
Yeah.
well. You know, we know these things. You know, these are this is what the science is projecting. You know, it may or may not be. That may or may not be where it goes, but this is what we're dealing with right now.
Right.
So I think the idea of kind of going through the assets first and kind of providing the data related to those can be helpful rather than, like when you talk about, if you first talk about like the number of barrier beaches or the number of homes that are in flood areas, but you kind of describe that in the, you know, as part of this overall context. And so you give people a sense of, here's what we have, but here's what the vulnerable areas are. Then you don't have to put all that data in the sea level rise. It's like you kind of just laid out that here are the areas that are vulnerable, and the reason that we've identified these as threats is because we've previously identified the areas that are vulnerable. So we talk about the amount of land that's in agriculture, and some of the, you know, some of the other things, or vulnerable populations, and those kind of topics. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that approach. I don't feel really strongly about it, but I think to bring the reader in, well, there's an argument that can say just talking about the threats in the abstract without understanding what is threatened or how much is threatened.
Yeah.
I think the other way, just, I'm more comfortable with that.
Well, lawyers are good at writing notes, so if you can pinpoint a place and say, here, this would be a good place to talk about this, and this, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
Hey, Ken, do you want to?
The other thing too is that when we talked, we had this discussion earlier in the week, we found it difficult to assess the impact on various assets or human and other assets within each of our 5 categories with respect to one another coming from different groups. But when we go back to the threats, you've listed them here in a little bit different way, but sea level rise, localized climate change, you know, whether that be temperature or humidity related, warming oceans, all those things. Individually, we can look at those. I think we can have more of an agreement on the scope and immediacy of each of those, and therefore what color they might be.
Yeah.
And then that flows out to all the things that they affect.
So what I'm kind of hearing is use the description of the assets to capture the reader, to make a connection with them, but then eventually deliver the results based on the threats that we see.
You know, when we got together trying to, really out of trying to resolve as we rolled up the rankings, and particularly just the way we ran the numbers and the way that the assessment had like the disproportionality and how to integrate that into some value. You know,
Yep.
the state. Now the state's orientation is that's really an environmental justice focus.
And other vulnerable populations.
And other vulnerable populations. And when we set off with these categories, water is an unusual category in that it really isn't about the water. It's really about the immediate coast is what we're talking about. And so if you look at the sea level rise and that chart, which sea level rise and water came out red. And I would say, no, the water's perfectly happy to have more water, right? You know, it's not the water that's at threat, it is the barrier island systems, it's the low-lying homes.
Can we go to?
Yeah, we have,
We're trying, we have to be mindful that there are people out attending virtually, so just, if I call them out, I'm not trying to interrupt, I'm just trying to give other people an opportunity to
Others
speak.
can't see that.
Go ahead, Kim.
So,
I'm sorry, did you call on me?
Yes.
So I just want to be clear on this. The colors that you have in there now, are those based on the current assessment that we did?
They're
Or
not-
you just really,
They're not, Kim, they're just numbers I threw in there to be able to produce a chart that can illustrate this structure.
okay, very good, thank you.
all right, Bob, keep going, sorry.
so, I'm sorry.
I think, Bob, the water category is a bit problematic because when we look through it, really captures most of what we would call ecosystem impact, right? It's not human health, it's not infrastructure, it's all of that stuff. So, yes, water is happy to have more water, but sand marsh is not
And a
necessarily.
lot of
And
what's
private
in-
residents, private properties and infrastructure that would be, I mean, that indirectly affected.
In
Yes.
a lot of what's in that section is sort of is really introductory stuff, you know. And I think we just have to be careful that everybody doesn't, that each section doesn't end up saying, climate's going to get warmer. We can't repeat the way we're structured here is what's at stake about Westport. That introduction needs to get the threat stated in there, I think. And if you say, okay, these are the consequences, then you say, well, okay, well, how does that threat work on health? How does that threat work on? And then each of those sections can stand alone. And I was also troubled by things like sea level rise in the barrier islands, so the homes, where Mike lives and John lives, and barrier homes and the low-lying older homes and the Cooksit and everything around the salt ponds. They are not particularly at the barrier islands, but are in the homes that are right close to the salt ponds, they already have high salinity in the water, and people don't drink the water. And that sea level rise will continue to exacerbate that. And on the barrier islands, at some point it will thin the freshwater lands so significantly that now we're going to put infrastructure there, restaurants, all of it, they'll start having real problems. But it's a very small number. It's a real problem, but it really affects, in terms of the geographic area of the town, very small geographic area. So if you look at the percentage of the people impacted, most people will not, sea level rise will not have any effect on their lives. And that was the kind of mismatch that I felt that we had, that somehow we needed to explain away. And I think the mapping, the map graphic, how much of the land is flooded, that whole idea of where is this population, how many homes actually sit in that, and things like the CZM, forecasting tools, coastal flooding forecasting tools, you can see the sort of kind of the chronic kind of things that will happen with a couple of feet. The Herring Brook will, you know, it looks upon 2 feet is enough to make several times a month that road would not be passable. And so you get those, the kind of, I think it's, I think, we don't think we need to deal with these big projections. It's looking at the vulnerable areas and then what can we do about the resilience?
So let's just zoom out a little bit, right? So the agenda topic today was just to talk about the first 4 chapters, and we started by talking about, is it laid out correctly? So the first couple of chapters, we have an introduction, we have about Westport, we have background, how this happened. I think that's fine. But I think what I'm hearing you say, so then we have section 4 is the what's at stake section, and then we have it by each of the 5 areas. And it isn't until section 7 that we're talking about the risks in each of those 5 areas. So what I think I was hearing you suggest is that rather than separating the what's at stake and the risks, to put them together. So you're putting the what's at stake for people and health and then the risks, and then what's at stake for water and the risk. Is that kind of what you're proposing from a structural point of view?
I'm not suggesting that we, yes, sort of. I'm not suggesting we abandon the approach that we took here.
Okay, you're just talking about more content.
But somewhere early on, we ought to tell people this in the what's at stake category. You know, we ought to tell people that this is the nature of the threat.
There's a fair bit of data in the what's at stake area already trying to characterize Westport. We haven't yet introduced the projections, so it's a little premature to be talking about the threats that I feel. I'm also hearing, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, that it sounds like we're missing some information about the projections here, like how many homes or how many miles of road might be inundated, and I don't know if that's going to come through the UMass projections or
Yeah,
not.
I mean, I think in those kinds of terms of, you know, if we took it, if we take the other tools and apply them, who and where is really at risk.
Yeah,
you know?
I agree.
And
More concrete.
And the idea of if we write a section in the abstract of, well, sea level rise is going to affect your wells, and, you know, you need to develop the drinking water. And everyone says, oh my God, when sea level rise is going to affect my well, and the answer is, no, it's only likely to be in the spring. Because we just topographically, if you look everywhere, you know, we rise up out of the rivers pretty quickly.
Very safely.
So, at least to me, what I thought a lot of that Bob was talking about and what drew Mike and Bob and I to talk was when I was trying to go back through and figure out how to quantify, you know, the new algorithm and to rank people quantitatively, and then to take these topic areas which related to magnitude, disproportionality, and adaptation gap, and assign characteristics to them. And what was a good example is in the disproportionality is, well, as a percentage of the population, that's an extreme, you know, that's a small area, people living near the barrier beaches. So,
But if that population is vulnerable,
yeah, so, yeah, I mean,
That's where you
for me, it was
start
more, I
considering.
just, you know, just tell me how you want me to.
It's also a high tax area, though.
Yeah.
I mean, this, the town gets a lot of its
Yeah, it was just tell
property
me how to,
taxes.
tell me how to think about it, you know, and, I think that led to kind of this, you know, broader discussion,
So,
you know, and.
you know, the well threat, for example,
Which is, you know.
we think it's high likelihood that wells are going to be impacted. We think the magnitude, which is the second factor, is high because drinking water is hard to replace. That already scores it pretty high. And then is there disproportionality? Is there an area where it's mostly elderly who have low or mobility or
Right.
resource constrained? Then that disproportionality factor can come in, but you don't have to have disproportionality for something to be a high risk.
Yeah.
Because it's high based on the other factors.
Well, it was, it ended up, you know, kind of resulting because the way, and this is almost like the second part of the agenda tonight, that we're talking about scoring rather than this report. So I'm just, is that, so the way you had set up the algorithm is you multiply magnitude times disproportionality times gap, okay?
Disproportionate.
You know, that's how I saw it. So, but with the outcome being, you would think that the highest number was a way of saying, this is really more important. And it was really easy, or what happened is that when you apply the, at least when I was doing, you apply the algorithm, you know, that you might have a really high disproportionality effect, but you know, the magnitude number was really small, but it really boosted the overall, and we just never talked about that.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I'm saying, you know, that so my end is that if whatever ranking mechanism that we have, we ought to have a discussion so everyone's thinking about that, because you were asking the subcommittee chairs rank things, and we weren't having a big meeting that said,
Right.
let's all collectively rank these now, and if you send it back to me, I'm gonna have questions about, when we talk about, in each of those categories, I have questions about how to do it, and when you get down to, you know, like.
Well, let's just
So
zoom
anyway.
out again. So the agenda topics, chapters 1 through 4.
Yeah.
So what is it that you were looking to get out of the group for these chapters? Like, because I think we're getting a little into the
Yeah.
details, which I think you might be talking about right for the assessment. It's hard to separate them. But you're still looking for comments on the structure of how it's laid out?
Yeah, I want to make sure that anybody who's got comments on what we've sent out gets them to us in written form to Dia. And then this issue about the structure had come up, so we wanted to discuss that a little bit.
So from a structural
Yeah,
perspective,
yeah.
so I heard your comment about getting more of the risks kind of up front, or embedding it more in the what's the problems. Because really the first part is the background, right? But the what's at stake is the problem statement, right? This is the problem that we're facing. Or this is the populate, this is what the impacts might be. No.
What's at stake?
It's the what's at stake is the what might be impacted by the changes. The risks assessment is just down further, right? It's in section 7.
So shouldn't it be in the beginning that you state what we think is going to happen?
I think there
And
can
then,
be
and then take that and take the tact of how, what's gonna happen is going to affect us. And then the other crazy thing I'd like to throw out, are there any benefits to sea level rise and climate change, as opposed to always looking for the bad stuff? You know, I won't have to walk as far down to the water. I mean, just stupid thing like that, but I mean.
Or we won't have as much snow to plow.
Yes, you don't.
It should be cheaper to heat in the winter. But, you know, especially in
I nominate you to
agriculture,
write that section, Jim.
especially in agriculture, does the change in climate make things that we couldn't do before possible? And is that an asset, or is that everybody's gonna scream, I can't do what I used to
We'll
do?
grow
But,
peaches here again.
huh?
We're
More
gonna grow
s-
peaches here again.
Right.
More CO2 means better crops.
So maybe you're talking about in the introductory paragraphs.
Right,
I don't-
right.
It's not immediately obvious where it'd be, but maybe more in the introduction about what some of the potential for. 'Cause
Well-
yeah.
I would suggest, when you got about Westport, you start to hit on some of the threats. You've got hurricane timeline, you've got some temperature data. You've got this monetary value of disasters. It seems like that we should separate out about Westport and start, if you're gonna talk about the threats, do a full threat analysis so people know this is the problem here. We're talking about sea level rise, increased temperatures, we're talking about warming oceans, we're talking about pH levels changing.
Yeah.
We're talking about 5 or 6 main drivers. And as Jake said at the last meeting, you know, I think you want to design it so it comes out the way you think it should come out. And the biggest risk to Westport is something that we're already pretty good at, catching hurricanes. So we want to make sure that, and that's one of those risks that affects everybody, affects the coastal people more, but it affects the whole town.
Yeah.
And it's pretty severe, and its timeline is, could be tomorrow. Well, it won't be tomorrow, but it could be the spring, it could be this year, or it could be 30 years, but its timeline is immediate.
Yeah.
So all the factors pulled together, should be a red.
So we'll let you respond with that, John.
Okay.
John, you something raising his hand?
I agree, Mike, but I think we need to keep the introductory stuff still at a kind of a high level. You know, one thing we can do is go, here's what you're gonna see in this report, chapter 4 from UMass Dartmouth, gives us our projections. Some of the highlights are in a few bullet points. Sea level rise, number of extreme storm events. You know, have those in the introduction, but the details are further down. And the threat assessment really is the meat of it, right? We've got to have a few pages for that. You can't
Yep,
just have that
understood.
all in the introduction.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna let John go.
Yeah, historical precedent, I think, is important to put in with hurricanes.
And we
People
have-
have limited memory.
Yes.
yeah, But those that remember know how tragic it was. And you have documentation of that as well, photo documentation, so, and that brings it alive, I think, for all the purple members of Westport.
John.
First of all, Shauna, thank you for co-chairing. So far, from what I've observed, you're doing a great job, and there's a risk to that, you know, Shauna. People will ask you to do it again. But I hope you keep chairing this meeting. I have, I guess, a couple of comments. I'm really grateful that Jeff and Dia are trying to collect everything and put it in a coherent draft, because there's a lot of work in that. Secondly, I think there are probably 8 ways you could write this, and we would convey the same basic information. There isn't one way to write it. And so therefore, I don't care too much about the order of stuff. I really think the meat and value of this report is number 6, the strategies on what to do to build resilience. And that's a plan that all of us, you know, town government and everyone else looks at and says, is this a good idea? If it's a good idea, how do we implement it? I'm worried if we, with a formula or algorithms to try and measure how many angels on the tip of a pin, you know, what are the odds of a hurricane hitting? I don't know, but I know that when they hit, and it's pretty sure we're going to get one sometime. Does it matter whether we're going to get one in 10 years or 20 years? I don't think so. It matters a lot more, what do you do to build resilience against a hurricane when you get it? Same with sea level rise or other things. I don't know whether it's going to rise 2 feet in 25 years or what, but it is rising, so what do you do to build resilience? And I'll give one example. You know, the odds of your house burning down are probably 10,000 to 1, but everyone has fire insurance, right? The odds don't matter there. What matters is people say, if my house does catch fire, I want to have insurance. So even though the odds are very low, the action to make resilience, i.e. fire insurance, is something people do because to them it kind of makes sense. And I think a lot of the recommendations on
resilience are those kind of things that make common sense, and we don't need to try to get too specific on the degree of threat analysis, because what happens when we do that is we start to get arguments about that, where I don't think they're really arguments on the steps necessary to build resilience. So I'm happy they're putting this together, and anyway, that's my comment.
So we're here to talk, the first item here is talk about chapters 1 through 4 and the health chapter. So I think you've gotten some comments about maybe some additional information in the introductions, maybe a little bit more, and kind of previewing the kind of the risks and the threats. And then we talked a little bit about the structure, and some of the other ones that John was talking about, the resilience, the risks, the what do we do about it, that's not on the agenda.
Right.
Okay. So, but also on the agenda called out the health chapter. So I just want to, I'm not sure why that was called out.
So the health chapter is a sample of how we would go through and do the risk assessment. So it, you know, for each of the sections we have similar information. We have the characteristics of the area, and then we have the threats, and then we roll them into some sort of matrix where we rank them. And this has been done by the subcommittee chair. So Phil did the one for health. I thought he did a great job with it. So just in terms of seeing the other chapters laid out in a similar way, do we think that's working?
Can you point me to what you're calling the health chapter in here, like where it is in the document?
It's at the, well,
You're gonna have two health
they
sections.
were, so it's not in the body of this draft.
Oh.
It should be. It was attached separately as a draft that I had done, you know, I had done before.
I think the one Dia sent, Dia, am I correct? The one you sent out had the health chapter.
Has everything together, had everything together.
So the
The
January-
first one,
Right.
January
After
27th.
chapter 4, it flows into like the health chapter, and then it has like some additional notes at the end. Well, let me pull up the document and see exactly where that begins.
So it gives me an opportunity to say something in the bigger picture, and then kind of what I did here in terms of how I dealt with threat, the part of it. And one thing I noticed in the outline draft is that there's really no description of what we mean by climate change, in the sense of we use the term, but we don't really talk about it. And so,
Well, that all should be pointing back to chapter 4.
okay, all right, so that's good.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. And then, as I said many times in the forum, what I did, because I don't know anything about this, you know, is that I relied on the state reports and said, this is how the state prioritized them.
Yeah.
And they said this was the #1 priority within the South Coast, Cape, and the Islands. And so that's how I prioritized it, and then used their factual information and additional factual information to update that. But I incorporated from them, you know, here's the number of deaths from heat, or here's the number of how many more cases of Lyme disease are we going to have, and that kind of information. And I just leave it up to you all as to how you're going. If that information is, we think it's important in the sense that we want to communicate how it's going to, how the scientists say it's going to proceed in the future, then we have to talk about the state reports. If we just want to say in the global thing, we've decided this is a big risk, and here are the risks, and not try to quantify what those are over time, then, you know, then I would really have to change my report.
It may be that the state projections for health may be more easy to scale down for Westport than some of the other categories.
Say again, I'm sorry.
It may be that the state projections as far as health may
Yeah.
be easier to scale down to Westport than the other categories.
So I think
And
I'm
by
saying
the
the
way,
health section,
the health
section 7.1, right? Is that because?
Yes, section 7.1.
Okay,
yes.
so it's the assessing the risk of Westport people in health section, so that's that's section 7, that first part.
This
So
is an old one.
where you have all the detail about all the, yeah. okay.
Right, exactly, yeah. And so I just think if we're going to have consistency in, through the chapters, that we have to think about how my report is structured, you know, versus some of the other reports. And, you know, then I'll have to, like, go back to the drawing board if you guys really change stuff.
Well, we sent yours out.
Or not, or just leave it as, I don't know, I'm just saying it's you know, that, I didn't know if you put this in, which you know, it's, okay, here's the template, the way I want everyone, all the other chapters are going to be, or you were, you know, just asking people to give me feedback on my chapter, so how to make it better,
Yeah.
or, you know, so.
No,
Yeah, anyway, it's fine, it's,
we used yours because we thought it was well done.
yeah, no, I appreciate that, I'm just drawing out for people who may not have really read it or thought about it in the context of what we're talking about. Here's the way I structured it, you know, and I relied pretty heavily on, you know, on the state reporting analysis in terms of doing threat analysis, although I didn't provide any numbers to it, or, you know, was not ranking it relative to other things. And then it also included all the things, not everything, but all the things that I think we could do going forward, without, you know, picking favorites, because, you know, it's, which we may want to do or not, because this is going to be a public comment draft, so we're going to go out to the public, so I don't know how much we should be saying, here's what we should be doing, and then, you know, because we want to get public feedback on stuff, I think.
So this is what we should be doing, and talk about the recommended
Yeah,
strategies.
going forward,
Yeah.
you know, going forward, and this is
I
what we're
think
talking about.
I think that's part of the plan, is to say,
Yeah,
based
no,
on the
exactly. I mean, I
the
think-
best information we have, the analysis tools that we were given, you know, the way these things are usually done, this is where we think the threats are.
Yeah.
And we're seeing strategies that other communities have implemented that seem to be working, or their fingers are crossed that they might work. There may be strategies in the hazard mitigation plan or other areas that are also reinforcing the fact that these are probably important actions to take for Westport. So I think that's part of what we would be putting out there.
Yeah.
So the way this is currently in the document, you have a big section that has a really good detail about the problem statement, the problem space, right? And then you have the recommendations. And I'm thinking the way that I'm reading the outline of the document overall, it has the suggestions and the recommendations in a separate section. So I'm not sure, it seems like it makes sense altogether, but that's also not outlined that way.
Yeah,
And-
well, for me, it was like, here's the
Well,
problem,
yeah.
here's what we're doing now,
Right, you
and
have,
then here's what, the more that I think we have to do.
yeah.
I think that's open to discussion as well.
Yeah, and that's just how I organized it.
Yeah.
I don't think you want to break up the flow of problem and solutions. You got to keep it together.
The only point I
Yeah.
would make about that is that you're making the recommendations against that category, right?
Right, okay.
And we may want to roll things up like we showed earlier, and then make recommendations based on the threats that we see.
Well, maybe section
Oh, yeah.
7
You
has
may
the
summarize them
category, right?
somewhere,
And then
but-
section 8 has the broader view.
But-
Yeah.
Yeah, you may.
Because this is
wanna-
all these silos, so I wrote this in silos.
Right.
And now we're trying to do the bigger integrated report.
And actually,
That's that's the reality, and everyone wrote it in a different style.
And
But you
I
wanna
feel
put-
like it will resonate if we
That's
roll,
okay.
if we roll out the recommendations based on the threat. Hurricanes are a threat, here are
Yeah,
some recommendations. Some of them are for people, some of them are for infrastructure and,
Yeah,
you know.
no, absolutely. And there's in an email I circulated, it's kind of looking at, the hazardous response plan, and they just have like a table, that and they just go down, here are the threats, here's what here's what we should do, here's the responsibility that, public responsibility, here's the timeline, so it's very compact, and that's fine.
Anything else on health chapter? So then, part that everybody seems to want to keep talking, the matrices. I'm going to talk about the matrices. Is that easy?
Well, we started to go through them last meeting, and I don't know, John, if you want to continue that or just take comments on them.
I think, I hope everyone takes an opportunity to go through what's distributed and write down their comments. I do it on paper because I'm a Luddite, but other people use track changes because but however you do it, go through the whole thing and get to Jeff and Dia. Here's suggestions I would make to make it clearer, to make it more accurate, or more coherent. But I think that's really important that everyone weigh in to Jeff and Dia, how they think what we reading presents, and use your own criteria about, how you want to comment.
So just to recap, all of the individual rankings that have been done by the subcommittees are rolled up into one spreadsheet with one tab each. And I believe that's a Google document, Dia. So we can send that link out again. If you have any questions about the methodology, there is a brief description somewhere in these chapters that we sent out. And if you have
Aren't some of the water ones not ranked yet? Aren't like the last 3 water impacts not ranked? Or am I mistaken?
No, I think we sat down with each of the subcommittees and completed that at least once.
Okay, I'll have to double check because I feel like I remember that there were 3 in water that we didn't get to.
Oh,
Yeah.
perhaps.
So the spreadsheet that I am familiar with is the one that you were using the UMass number system, right? Which
Yeah.
is 100 times 100. It was that
Correct.
divide by 3 kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was like that was this, and then you came back with the 10 system, right?
Oh.
1 to 10, and then multiply them. And
Yeah.
so
They took the average of 3 scores.
Yeah.
We just said, based on what I've seen before, we multiply it, we get a bigger spread of numbers. So it makes it easier to identify the real high stuff and the medium
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So that, I don't think that should be controversial.
No, I don't. I'm just wondering about circulating the spreadsheet. I have never seen I've never seen a spreadsheet that used the quantitative system that you used. I think the
Okay.
one that was
I
circulating.
think we have that from all the subcommittees. I think it's all in one Google document.
Okay, all right.
And we can send that out
Sure.
again. So
It's
if you
not
have questions about why something was graded one way or the other, or what does this mean,
Okay.
send
It's not
send those back as questions and we'll address them.
It's not the numbers that's confusing to me, Jeff, it's the, magnitude of consequence, got that. That's, that can be taken, we talked about how severe is it, for how many people, there's a little bit of ambiguity in there, but, that's kind of clear. Disproportionality of exposure, not sure about that. Adaptation gap, not sure about that. And then in the end, urgency score, which seems to me should be a compilation of everything, it should be a result versus.
It is.
It is, okay. But the second two, I'm just, maybe spend 2 minutes just describing
Sure.
how we should think about
The
those.
state's most recent assessment included this factor called disproportionality. And the details are that a threat would be scored according to, 1 to 100, let's call it, based on whether that threat would disproportionately impact specifically environmental justice populations.
Okay, so that's all, that's, all right.
Which we have one census tract or one neighborhood in West Ward designated such based on the income criteria for environmental justice.
So
areas.
100 score would be the most disproportionate.
Yes.
I have this spreadsheet up also.
But in addition to that, in the latest assessment, they broadened it a little bit beyond just environmental justice to include other vulnerable populations wherever they may reside.
Like what?
Elderly, low-income people, people with low mobility, people with poor health.
And how do you figure that out when you,
Only if we have available data. We have a few indicators, like the South and West Board is notably older demographic than the North. So if there's something that is disproportionately affecting the South, it could be argued that that is, could merit some higher score on the disproportionality score.
Is there a reason we need to pay attention to this disproportionality score? I mean, this report isn't required by the state. We're doing this voluntarily
Yeah.
for our own purposes.
yeah, it seems really.
Do we really
ambiguous.
need that?
Ambiguous.
Well, the state likes to see the
Yeah, we
reports
don't wanna make-
done using the methodology that they use. So UMass's recommendation was that, if we are going for grants, it would be beneficial to us to be able to show that this threat has been identified as a result of their methodology or a similar methodology.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your last, if we're gonna go through UMass Dartmouth, we should use the
No,
disproportionality.
they set up the initial scoring methodology for it based on what the state would be using. And they argued that if.
Based on what state, I'm sorry, you're,
Massachusetts.
What the state is using.
okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
and their statewide assessment and the
Yeah.
regional assessments.
Right,
And their argument was that if a project was rated high here, using the methodology that they use, they would
give us money.
consider that for funding. Or more likely, they would say if it was rated high and we hadn't considered disproportionality, they may score that lower in the funding round.
So the example that that I used was because extreme heat disproportionately impacts elderly people. And then you look at the proportion in Westport of elderly people demographically, and it's fairly high.
It's
And
high
so-
overall,
Elderly
and
and
it's high over,
Yeah.
it's high overall, and it's higher in the south part of the West.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't like, yeah. And so, or I recently discovered that, which was surprising to me, that the people who go to the emergency room for Lyme disease are really young people and really old people. I think, what are they out in the woods? They're not out in the woods walking around. That's what the data shows. So that's how I think you come see it, where you're looking at.
One report that I looked at for an urban area, for example, one of their high danger areas was a river that frequently flooded the parking lot, and in that location was a elderly high-rise residence.
Yeah.
So you think about that river flooding, people trying to get out, ambulances trying to get in. So that
Right.
makes sense to consider the disproportionality of the and the vulnerable population there. Exacerbates the seriousness of that problem,
Yeah.
which is already significant.
Jean?
What about adaptation gap, Jeff? Can you give us a little primer on that?
So what they have done is said, if we're already on the path to addressing a problem, maybe that problem gets scored a little bit lower. Whereas if we're nowhere near starting to address that, it gets a higher score.
So I'm going to suggest that having 5 subcommittee chairs try to sort all that out in different ways, that this might be an element of the report that we ask professionals to do with a single group that has a consistent approach to each individual. I mean, it seems so subjective to me. I could come up with a bunch of answers, and Phil might come up with totally different answers for the same problems. And I would just suggest that if you want consistency there, we might just farm that part out.
What drove Phil's good analysis when we rolled up everything into the scores, and this is not about the numbers, but this is about how caring people wanted to get it right and put down the numbers, okay? So when Phil went through and took exactly the UMass suggestions and took the threats, and like groundwater contamination, the composite number for the infrastructure group was 252. The water group said it was 60.
Okay, so you've got different endpoints, right? So we're talking about sea level rise impacting groundwater versus infrastructure?
The category was the category was the groundwater contamination. This was from sea level rise.
Yes. Okay. So sea level rise affects humans. Okay. You could visualize how that could be scored differently than how it affects infrastructure, septic systems and buildings and things like that. Right?
And I ranked the overall threat to sea level rise, the septic system in the town is nil.
Through the lens of infrastructure.
No, I don't think it's much of a threat at all. The sea level rise.
He was overlapping.
95% of the septic systems in this town will never see an effect from sea level rise. But those who live right in the ocean, they're going to see an effect. Those,
So for them,
we already have wells in the Coxsett in which they can't drink the water. If the sea level gets a foot higher, there will be more wells in which the salinity gets to be undrinkable. So for them, it's a big threat. But if you live in the north of 177, it's not a threat at all.
yeah. So we're looking at likelihood may be high, magnitude. It's a small percentage of the houses, small percentage of the proportion. The magnitude is small. But if the town was under the obligation to replace those systems or find some sort of alternative, and all of a sudden that's a financial impact, because the analysis is done at the level of the town, right? Not individual property owners. We're talking about what is the impact on the town? What is the magnitude of the impact? So if it's a huge financial burden that's being triggered, then the score would be higher, I would assume.
John?
I'm sorry, I want to keep coming back to what I think the most important end product is, because I think if we're in agreement about how that works, it makes it easier to do all the lead-ins to it. And I'm very worried about our ability to achieve high levels of specificity without any accuracy at all. And because we've got, formulas, algorithms, and everything else, we'll get very specific about ranking, but it won't be accurate. Mike said, should this be subjective? I'm going to suggest, yes, there's a role for that. If Jeff and Dia combine in this chart a first draft at what the ranking ought to be. And I don't know how many we've got, I can't remember, 60 or whatever it is. And then we had a meeting of this group where everyone looked at that ranking. And we said, who wants to change any rankings? You know, Jim, you want to change a ranking, make a case for it. And people could agree or not, or it could end up in a vote. But we have a base to start with, and it may be subjective, Mike, but I think it's also going to be accurate. And let me just give one example of recommendations. You know, one recommendation in health, given heat, is provide room air conditioners for income eligible seniors. One recommendation in agriculture is cover crops in the winter. One recommendation in infrastructure is hardening power supply, so it's less vulnerable. And I don't know what you do about saltwater intrusion into wells, how you prevent that. But my point is, those are very different. And thinking that we can make an argument backed up by numbers that cover crops is more or less important than room air conditioners or hardening electricity. Why are we trying to say one of those is more important? They're going to get separate funding sources. Hardening utilities is going to be a conversation with the select board and the utility company. Providing air conditioners is going to be going to local foundations perhaps, or companies to help create a fund with the Council on Aging. Cover crops is, can we persuade farmers to do something that most of them are not used to doing? So we're going to make arguments to different folks to get things done. And trying to say one of those is more important than the other, I'm not sure that helps us do that. You know, they're either important and help us achieve resiliency, or they're not worth our effort in trying to get something done, either because it's a low priority or because there's no answer to it.
The only reason we're talking about it is because you've asked us to take on
Yeah.
a rather a difficult task, and you've asked us to do it in a precise way. I'm suggesting that we should have a professional sort through it.
I'm just
They're
worried
gonna-
about one thing, and maybe I can clear it up. There's nothing inherently inconsistent about something scoring high in one area and low in another. You know, in public health, ticks and tick-borne diseases are scoring high. They're not scoring high in water or agriculture.
Jeff,
Because
I'm just
there's
saying,
no problem.
these categories, two of these categories seem to be contrived in my perspective. I'd rather have somebody who can give it a good objective view from one perspective and sort of make everything, put everything into the same, you know, grouping, if you will, rather than have, I mean, I feel completely incapable of giving you a thoughtful analysis and disproportionality, adaptation. I mean, it's all very, very subjective, and it goes from 0 to 100. So, I mean, I feel like I'm wasting my time.
Well, we had to designate people as subject matter experts, whether they like bearing that title or not. So we dished that out to distribute the work.
May I make a
Yeah.
comment?
Yes, go ahead, Councilman.
Thanks. I agree, Mike. I have a hard time understanding what that means, but I just want to point out one more time that if we come out with this report and we talk about climate change and, and sea level rise and how and we take the view that we've got some real problems here, and we look at the areas which basically, like in Southwestport, on the river, on the water, and say these properties are of major risk. And I don't really know, I mean, I'm one of them, I guess. I'm in a flood zone, I'm right on the river. And I think what the problem is down in Acoxia is as much or more, it's when a lot of people come in the summer and they're drawing down the water, then they draw down enough water where they're pulling up and this has been going on for a very long time, and it's not really related, I don't think, to sea level rise, but it's a problem. But when we get out in front of ourselves and we talk about this as these properties are in very bad jeopardy for their wells, for septic systems, for all of this, then I just took a big hit in terms of my property taxes being raised. So if this is our conclusion and Westport comes together and says, all these properties down there on the water where we get a lot of our town taxes, property taxes from, are really in bad shape and are going to take a big hit, how, you know, in terms of resale value and everything, I mean, then can I get like my property taxes lowered? Because if this is true and if things are going to go to hell in a handbasket pretty soon, then we might want to think about that in terms of how we project what our most valuable properties are for our property taxes here in Westport and how they're going to be affected for everybody in the world to see. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I kind of on the, I don't think it's that true, but especially with the climate change thing. But however we present this, it does seem like we're putting some stuff out there that is highly conjectural and maybe quite damaging in the long run.
I don't think it's a secret that coastal areas on the U.S. East Coast are increasingly vulnerable. People know that.
That's what the
People have been
insurance
talking
and
about
flood
that.
people want you to think, and that's certainly what they say. I'm not so sure that that's true. I mean, they're vulnerable because we keep building on them, and we keep building bigger houses. And the one next to me is like, you know, it was a small house. Now it's a bigger house, and it's going to cost, you know, it's more valuable. So therefore, if something happens, well, you know, I mean, same with mine, you know. So I think we should be cautious about that and be pretty sure what we're talking about and not just sort of go off the deep end with that, because I don't think it'll be helpful for us here in Westport.
I think one of the more helpful things of this analysis is when I first started thinking of hearing about just sea level rise, and you think of the well and septic, and you think about the people that are right on the water, but vector transmitted disease is not a water thing.
Right.
Vector transmitted disease is Northwest Port is going to have that, and some of your economically disadvantaged areas. And I think one of the things that's really great about this is that it kind of shows it's not just the people who have houses on the water that have something to lose here, right? So
Absolutely.
I can see where you're concerned, but I don't think we're saying, you know, this particular property is at risk or something, but I think we're just looking at our community is at risk. And I mean, I hear you, Mike, about the specificity, but also I don't, you know, if we all got our heads together and did it at the same time, it would take us forever. If we outsourced it, we're just gonna complain about whatever.
Well, make it easy. I think Dia and Michael and Jeff, I'll just defer to you. There's 3 open ones on my list out of all the ones we have. Just, you guys just take a look at it and make those assessments. I feel wholly incapable of doing an objective, you know, using your methodology to do what you like, but I think you guys are comfortable with it, so I'm fine.
So the methodology was based on UMass's development, I believe, right, Jeff? There was, you took some guidance from the way UMass initially did their system.
Yeah, what's the system at the states?
I also want to say that I don't think there's really an objective way to do a ranking system like this. It's inherently a subjective activity where we're ascribing values to certain things in the community. So that's just going to be what it is. It will be subjective to some degree. And what Jeff is doing is he's trying to provide a mechanism to bring in a little bit of objectivity to the ranking system.
So I thought that, you know, based on what John's been saying a lot, that we're not going to come up for the report with a numbers, and so it's not going to be like there's going to be a health support set of numbers in everybody's report. We're going to use major or extreme, or we're gonna.
High, medium, low.
Whatever we're gonna do about that, okay? And then, but that there's still behind that, this concept of magnitude and disproportionality and adaptation gap. And it seems to me, it's part of not really thinking about the scoring, but what I did is that then the reports should talk about that. That is, here's the magnitude of, here's the magnitude of the problem. And there's kind of, as Sean was saying, there's a bit of a social justice, like if you say, well, there's a lot of old people getting impacted on this, or a lot of young people, or, that people who, because of their income, are much more likely to be, can't afford medical care. You can speculate about what it's about. And similarly, if we have a sense of what's going on now and how big a step it is to get where it is, like air conditioners, well, we know that works because the Council on Aging has done it, so here are things that we've done. And then we just, and so we give that information to you all and have you propose a ranking based on, like, if we give you the information within each category about why we think it's serious, what's going, that it affects different parts of the population, and what we're doing now and where we want to, what our recommendations are. When you look at the recommendations, you'll probably have a pretty good idea how big the gap is. You can say, wow, that's a big, that's a big thing, or no, it's not that big a deal, let's put up evacuation signs. Well, that's not a heavy lift,
It might be for Westport.
Yeah, it might be for Westport. I mean, developing a grant program
It's not trivial.
for low-income people might be a big lift, because I don't know where the money's coming from.
So Phil, can I
just turn it over to you guys and
if I can build on that, just the process that we've talked about. If we do what you say, which I think is a very good suggestion, and Jeff kind of collapses all of those into a draft, and then Michael made a really important point, which is inevitably this is going to be subjective. So if it's going to be subjective, the more people who can weigh in mean the subjectivity is going to be more accurate. So once Jeff does it, then this committee, which has lived this for 3 years, can have a round or two saying, which rankings do we disagree with? And move some up or move some down. And then after that, the intention is to go out to the public.
Right.
And say, here's what we're thinking. What do you think?
Right.
And just, for humility's sake, the planning board said, we think scenic roads is a great idea, until Tuesday night when 100 people said, no, you guys are nuts. So you get impact from the public and you change based on that impact. And so some people will say, this is really important, or they'll say it's really important to me.
Yes.
Or they'll say, this one isn't, and we'll learn from that.
And to follow up on that, I mean, if we didn't have to hang this all on climate change, I think there are many people that would come along with this, and because there are very real things that we need to think about in terms of hazard mitigation, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of all of this, that are definitely something that are things that are vulnerable here in Westport because of our geography and because of our demographics. And those are really valid things to think about, and to have a plan for it, to try to mitigate and be prepared for that. It's all absolutely, I think, worth doing, and something that we can talk to people about and they will say yes. But if we hang this all on climate change with, this is going to happen, we're going to have this bad stuff happen, and we know it, and I just think it really puts us on shaky ground. And also immediately you've got half of the population at least that are gonna go, oh please, and they're not gonna pay any more attention to it because they're gonna think, oh, they got an agenda, they got an agenda, they're not really
Yeah.
just thinking about what we need to be doing. And
You're right.
I know, and I understand that this is something the state's gotta be in its bonnet about, and so, if we're gonna go and try to get money from them, then we have to play the game, but I don't think it's helpful for us here in Westport.
Well, that's one reason we talk more about extreme weather and severe weather than climate change, right? Like people are experiencing more intense storms, they are experiencing
Well,
higher winds.
I see, I think people would disagree with you about that too. It's like, we live in New England. I mean, it gets cold in the winter. This is February. Yeah, we just had a big snowstorm and stuff, but that happens. I mean, that's happened a long time, right? I mean, this is New England. So, I think that extreme weather events, there are extreme weather events, but the fact you're saying, oh, they're more prevalent, they're more extreme, they're this, they're that, then again, you're hanging that on climate change, global warming, where we can just all agree that, yeah, we have some extreme weather events, whatever, and we need to be prepared for them.
All right, so what are the actions that you're asking from this group for the next? What do you want us to do between now and the next meeting?
If you haven't already, please review everything that was sent out, and we flagged areas where we know there's missing information. If you know and can help us out, we'd really appreciate that. If you want to write a little paragraph that we can insert, that's great input too. Otherwise, if you're generally satisfied with the way we're talking about structuring the report, we're going to continue going along that route, and hopefully the next thing you see will be a little clearer and make sense in terms of the way it's being presented.
And then what's the next step on the matrices?
Don't look at me, you're the guy doing this, thank God.
I mean, we've got just about everything, so we'll incorporate them as we've, based on the information we've gotten from you guys, and if there's anything missing, we'll just try and fill in as best as we can. And we'll look for inconsistencies, but I think those can be explained away because we're looking at the impact on a particular, area.
And then the idea would be after you finish doing that we would review it together and kind of sanity check what we all think. Instead of talking about all of 60, we might talk about the 4 that kind of had some disagreements on. So, okay. And then I guess at a future meeting, we'll talk about more of the report. Okay. Is there anything else that we need to have a meeting? We need to set the next meeting date. So do you want to do that, John?
The next meeting, I think this is a lot, Dia and Jeff, in terms of if people haven't read what's out there and given you reports, perhaps they need 2 weeks to do that. But what do you and Dia need to put all this together? Is it a month? Is it 2 months?
Well, when's UMass going to come back with their piece? Because that would be a pretty significant piece.
We're still waiting to hear what their timeline is and how much work still needs to be done on it.
You want to say 2 months, or?
Do we need to set a?
Yeah, we need to set a date now when we got everyone
date for
around.
meeting.
Yeah, date for meeting.
Well, I think we could set a meeting for a month from now, and if we don't need the meeting, if we're not ready, we can defer it maybe.
All right, a month
We should
from
have
now.
something.
And emphasize that if you haven't gotten comments, then please get them in to Jeff and Dia. So we're February 12th, so that's looking at March. We want a Thursday. So
March 12th.
March, 28 days in February, it's always the same in March. So is March, does March 12th work for people?
Yep.
5 o'clock?
I'll be away, but if everyone else can.
All right, March 12th, and please get comments in.
All right, is there any further business?
I have a question. In the end, how does this get produced? I mean, how does this get to look like the reports that we get on?
We have a $7,500 grant from BACOS that can be applied towards that. We haven't spent it on anything else, I don't think. So that can help us do that. And when we met with UMass Dartmouth, while we were talking to subject matter experts, Nepheli and Chad, and the beautiful thing about UMass Dartmouth is they have all kinds of capabilities from layout, printing reports, etc. So I think Nepheli can reach out to other parts to also help us with that.
Dia and I also know how to use Adobe InDesign too, and we'll be getting Adobe InDesign next fiscal year, so we can work on arranging the documents.
Because I read the thing, and I read the entire thing, and I sent comments, and but right now the draft is filled with pieces that are hanging. These definitions, it looks like it's set up that there will be, and if this thing gets put into
Design
publication format, these boxes all then appear in side panels and the 3 columns are.
Yep.
So it's,
Yeah.
We just don't want
Next-
to dump it in there
Yeah.
too early.
Next
because if
fiscal
we-
year, we'll have the tools to do that.
we don't have any tools.
Not right now, but come
But
June,
July
July
1.
1st, yeah.
Okay?
Anything else?
You don't want to do that too early because then it's hard to make changes within that program.
So we want to have a document that's complete and gone through this committee's review in time for maximum interaction with the people of Westport. And so Dia and Jeff were thinking if there's a way we can get to that point by late spring or early summer, then it makes it easier for us to engage the public. And so just keep that in mind too, that we don't want to indefinitely put it off because that'll make the public engagement part harder. All right, you want a motion to adjourn, Madam Chair? Move to adjourn.